Welcome to our next class. This week we will look at HTML form processing, and I have a video to cover the basic HTML form elements. We will also look at some valuable PHP functions and variables that work with form data. I will also be using a simple if-else statement. However, we will cover this and loops and validating the data in a later chapter. Most of you should be familiar with a basic if conditional statement. So here we have an if, a condition inside the parentheses, and an opening and closing curly brace. If the condition is true, the code to be executed inside the braces will be executed. We also have an if-else. Here we are testing the same condition with two possible outcomes. If the condition is true, the code inside the curly braces will execute. If the condition is not true, the code inside the else will execute. So here we have a basic HTML form structure. We start out with the opening and closing form tag, and inside we have our multiple form elements. Every form element should be connected to a label element for purposes of accessibility. Every form element will also have a name attribute to uniquely identify it to the server, in this case, which is PHP. The ID attribute is used for CSS and JavaScript. Because these attributes are unique, you will commonly see the same value being used for both. The only instance is with radio buttons, where they all need to have the same name. Again, I have a video going over the basic form elements. You will always have some type of button to submit the data. Here I have a type equals submit. In HTML, there are approximately 20 form controls or elements that are created with the input tag. They all vary by the type attribute. Type equals submit calls the action of the form. The action of the form is the script that will process it. In our case, it is a PHP script. The method of the form indicates how the data will be sent. It will either be sent as a post, meaning the data is sent in the body of a message and you cannot see it. It can also be sent as a get, which is commonly referred to as a query string, where you can see the data. Here again, I go over this in more detail in the video. So when a user fills out a form, they are entering values. They are either typing in a value or taking the cursor and clicking to indicate a value. And when you click the submit button and the action of the form is called, the name value pairs are sent to the server. So we code in the names, the user codes in the value. In the event of certain form elements, such as radios, checks, and a drop-down list, we also code in the value, and the user chooses the value by virtue of clicking. So technically, the user is responsible for the value. What we do with a PHP script is we intercept those name-value pairs and make some sense of them. We are interested in knowing what values have been sent with respect to the identifying names of the form elements. So there are two components of HTML forms. One is the actual form itself, the user interface, which we create with HTML and CSS. However, in and of itself, that is useless because all it does is sit there. In order to be able to retrieve the information, we need a script on the server. So this server-sided PHP script can do many things. It can send the form results via email, and we will look at that later. It can write the data to a text file. It can update a database, which is very, very commonly done, and it can perform some other type of processing. I would like to point out that this is done on the server. This is a server-sided technology. Last week we briefly went over some PHP server variables. These are called superglobals. Superglobal because they are always accessible regardless of scope. The scope of a variable indicates the level in which it is available. The $_server variable is essentially an associative array that contains information, and we can retrieve the values of that information by passing parameters to it. The _get and _post. These are associative arrays of the variables being passed in a form using either the get or the post. It is a collection of them. Here again, they're associative arrays because they work with what are called key value pairs rather than index values. There is also the _request variable, which allows us to determine if the contents were sent by a get or a post or a cookie, which we'll look at later. We also have the PHP _self variable, which indicates the actual file that is open at that point. These all are involved with form processing. All right, _server. And if we were to pass it, the parameter PHP _self, notice these are all uppercase, and notice we're using brackets. Here again, it's an associative array. Brackets usually indicate an array. This will return the file name of the currently executing script. $server _request method. This will return the request method that was being used, and that will return either a post or a get. The $_server PHP _self expression is commonly used in order to post a form to itself. So here we see the action, and inside we have this expression. That would be equivalent to hard coding in the file name. You may commonly see forms being posted to themselves, especially if you are validating the form, because you can have the error message right there on the same page. The $_request server variable. When it comes to retrieving form values, you want to have a little bit of error checking in place. If the data is sent via a post, you need to retrieve it that way. And even if you know that you're coding in method equals post, and you know that your PHP script is using a post, it still is not a bad idea to have this if statement. And this is commonly where we use this to determine how the data was sent. So if indeed it is a post, then we will proceed in retrieving the values. I would like to also say that it is possible to load any PHP file and execute it. And if there are no values for those variables, you're going to get error messages. So therefore, you don't want to run this unless it's actually being called from a form. Once we have that, we also have the $_request variable. And if we use as a parameter the name of the form element, it will return the value. So this is one way of retrieving a value of a form element. Remember, the server sends over the name-value pairs, and we need to intercept that name in order to retrieve the value. And yes, you would do this for every field in your form. Next week, we will learn how to loop through them, which saves some time. We also have the $_post server variable. And if you were to use the name of the form element as a parameter, it will return the value. This is another way of returning the value of a form element, and this, in my opinion, is the most popular and the easiest. We also have a get request method. So if you were using a get, then $_get would allow you to retrieve the value for that form element. So you have to use either $_get or $_post based on the method that you are using. The filter underscore input function. All right, this is a function, a PHP function that can also be used to return the value of a form element. It takes two parameters. The first parameter is essentially the input type. The second parameter is the name of the form element. So here, if you were using a get, you would use the filter underscore input function and pass it the input underscore get parameter to retrieve the value for the specified form element's name. Sometimes we want to make sure that there is a value being sent over. The isSet function returns true or false. So we can use this within an if statement to make sure that we do have values. This is often used to see if a checkbox or radio has been checked, because they will not send over a value unless they are checked. The empty function is used to check whether the form element's value is empty or nothing. Here again, if a text box is not filled in, it will return a value of empty or nothing. So we can use this in an if condition. Two very useful functions. One is trim. Trim is used to trim white space on both sides. Here again, in the future, we will be putting data into a database, and you want to make sure that all the white space is removed. HTML special chars function. What this does, it essentially encodes special characters that a user might enter in order to send some malicious code over to the server. This commonly might happen in a text area where you can type in a large amount of code. For example, you can use some malicious JavaScript which would entail writing the script tag. So what this function does is it encodes them so that they are sent over as special characters and they're not literally interpreted and do not cause harm. This process of trying to send malicious code to the server in a form is called cross-site scripting, and the acronym is XSS. As you can see, you might want to use the HTML special chars and the trim function. So ultimately, there are several ways that we can retrieve the value and assign it to a variable. $_post, filter underscore input, and ultimately we can use our HTML special chars and our trim. Here again, the above two also work with a get. Sometimes, depending on the situation, you might need to exit a script. That might generally happen in an else condition, and the die function allows you to exit the script. You can also pass some data which will be seen, and that will be the end of the script. The exit function is identical to the die. Here again, it enables us to exit a script and also to send a message at the same time. Sometimes you might want to redirect a file, and this is the header function. It allows us to send the user to another page. Here again, you might be processing a form, and you might want to redirect the user to a generic thank you page. And this is the syntax in which you would do that.